All Americans are being urged to leave the Middle East. The wave of Iranian airstrikes now prompting U.S. embassies in Iraq, Jordan, and Bahrain to order non-emergency personnel to leave their posts.
Whatever the time is, it's okay, whatever it takes. Right from the beginning, we projected 4 to 5 weeks, but we have capability to go far longer than that.
حرب السعوديين هذه حربي اللي أخوضها شخصيا.
Overnight, President Trump vowing to retaliate after the U.S. embassy in Saudi Arabia was hit by Iranian drones.
Iran thought it had broken Saudi Arabia. Missiles raining on Riyadh. Drones targeting the U.S. embassy in the Saudi capital. Iran's most feared weapon, a drone swarm. Striking the Ras Tanura refinery, Saudi Aramco's crown jewel, processing over 500,000 barrels every single day. Fires at the plant. Operations halted, oil prices spiking 10% in hours, and Iran's calculation was simple. Hit Saudi Arabia's oil, break Saudi Arabia's nerve, force Riyadh to demand America stand down. But then Mohammed bin Salman did something nobody, not Iran, not Washington, not the global energy market, expected. He did not flinch. He did not beg. He activated a 1,200-kilometer secret pipeline running across the entire Arabian Peninsula to a sea Iran cannot touch, cranked it to 7 million barrels per day, a flow rate never tested before, expelled Iran's military attaché and 4 embassy staff with 24 hours to leave the kingdom, issued a joint Gulf condemnation signed by 6 nations simultaneously, and then told Donald Trump privately to finish the job and not stop until there are significant changes in Iran's leadership. Saudi Arabia, a country that spent 3 years building bridges with Tehran, just locked down the entire Gulf against Iran, and the consequences for the region are only beginning. Before we reveal exactly what Saudi Arabia did to Iran diplomatically that shattered 3 years of reconciliation in 24 hours, why Petroline, a pipeline built in the 1980s during the Iran-Iraq War, is now pumping 7 million barrels per day, and what its limits reveal about the Gulf lockdown, how Iran struck Saudi oil refineries at Ras Tanura, Samref, Satorp, and Riyadh simultaneously, and what it cost the global energy market, why 6 Gulf states issued a joint condemnation on March 26th, reserving the explicit right to respond militarily, and what that legal language actually unlocks, what Saudi Arabia's geopolitical analyst called the most dangerous sentence of the entire war. Everyone should pray that Saudi Arabia does not join, and why MBS is now privately pushing Trump to press on until regime change, and what happens to global food and water supplies when the Gulf locks down because 70% of every calorie eaten in the Gulf still travels through the strait Iran closed. Subscribe and hit that bell. Because what Saudi Arabia just did to Iran is not just a diplomatic story or an energy story. It is the story of how the most important oil kingdom on earth chose a side and locked the entire Gulf down with it. We connect it, right now. Here is what Iran did to Saudi Arabia, and why Ras Tanura was the line that changed everything. Iran launched a multi-day series of missile and drone strikes on Saudi Arabia beginning February 28, 2026, the same day Operation Epic Fury began, striking Riyadh's eastern province, targeting the Prince Sultan airbase, hitting the U.S. embassy in Riyadh, and sending drone swarms toward Saudi Aramco's largest domestic refinery at Ras Tanura. Not a symbolic strike, a strike on the physical heart of Saudi Arabia's economy. The Ras Tanura refinery processes more than 550,000 barrels of crude per day, Saudi Arabia's single largest refining facility, and its shutdown caused immediate spikes in global oil prices. Saudi Aramco halted operations as a security precaution. A blaze broke out at the facility, and across global markets, oil shot up nearly 10% within hours. Think about what Ras Tanura meant to MBS personally. Torbjorn Soltvedt, principal Middle East analyst at Verisk Maplecroft, told Energy Connects, "The attack on Saudi Arabia's Ras Tanura refinery marks a significant escalation, with Gulf energy infrastructure now squarely in Iran's sights, and it is likely to move Saudi Arabia and neighboring Gulf states closer to joining U.S. and Israeli military operations against Iran." Closer to joining operations. Not just condemning, joining. That assessment came on day 2 of the war, and Iran did not stop there. Iran struck Saudi Arabia's refineries repeatedly across 6 weeks, hitting Ras Tanura twice, striking the Samref refinery on March 19th, halting units at the Satorp refinery on April 7th to 8th, and targeting the 120,000 barrel per day Riyadh plant. with Saudi Arabia's state news agency confirming the attacks were directly affecting exports of refined products to global markets. Every refinery, every export hub. Iran was not fighting a military campaign against Saudi Arabia. It was fighting an economic assassination. And Saudi Arabia's response was to do something it had never done in the history of the kingdom's modern diplomacy. Here is what Saudi Arabia did to Iran, and why the 24-hour expulsion was the most unthinkable move in the Gulf. On March 21, 2026, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia notified Iran's military attaché, his assistant, and 3 members of the embassy mission staff to leave the kingdom, declaring them personae non gratae and requiring their departure within 24 hours. 24 hours. Not a formal protest, not a summoning, a hard expulsion. The military attaché, Iran's intelligence eyes inside Riyadh, physically removed from the kingdom with 1 day's notice. Think about what this means after 3 years of reconciliation. Saudi Arabia and Iran had not had diplomatic relations for years after Saudi Arabia cut ties in 2015 following attacks on its embassy in Tehran. Saudi Arabia last cut off diplomatic ties with Iran in 2015. Then in 2023, China brokered a landmark reconciliation deal, the Beijing Agreement, that restored relations and was supposed to define a new era of Gulf-Iran cooperation. MBS spent years building that bridge, and Saudi Arabia's foreign ministry statement explicitly cited the attacks as a violation of the Beijing Agreement itself, the very deal Iran and Saudi Arabia had signed as a symbol of regional peace. Iran used missiles to tear up its own peace deal. Saudi Foreign Minister Prince Faisal stated publicly that the kingdom will not succumb to pressure, and added that Saudi Arabia reserves the right to respond militarily if necessary, dismissing Iranian claims that its attacks are linked to U.S. military bases as unconvincing and asserting that the strikes were premeditated. Premeditated. That is a foreign minister calling Iran's attacks on Saudi soil a deliberate act of aggression, not collateral damage from a wider war. And reserving the right to respond militarily means the legal case for Saudi offensive action is now being built in public, statement by statement. Qatar followed immediately, expelling Iran's military and security diplomats with their staff and ordering them to leave Doha within 24 hours after Iran attacked a Qatari gas field. 2 Gulf states simultaneously expelling Iranian military intelligence officials. This is not routine diplomatic friction. This is the Gulf cutting Tehran's eyes out from inside their own capitals. Now here is the joint Gulf lockdown, and why the March 26 declaration was the most legally significant document of the entire war. On March 26, 2026, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, and Jordan issued a joint condemnation of Iran and its affiliated armed groups, collectively stating they may take the necessary measures and actions to protect their security and stability, preserve their assets and wealth, and respond to these attacks in a manner commensurate with the scale of the threat. 6 nations. 1 statement, reserving the right to respond militarily, simultaneously, together. Think about what that legal language unlocks. The statement explicitly invoked the UN Charter. Gulf countries have said they have a right to respond under the UN Charter, as Iran has applied the use of force within their states. Article 51 of the UN Charter permits individual and collective self-defense when an armed attack occurs against a member. 6 Gulf states just collectively invoked it against Iran in writing. That is not a press release. That is a legal framework for war. And the GCC Secretary General made the stakes explicit, describing the Iranian attacks as the deliberate targeting of infrastructure and oil facilities in flagrant violation of international law and norms, posing a direct threat to regional security and the stability of global energy supplies. Global energy supplies, not just Gulf security, the entire planet's energy stability. U.S. allied Gulf states, including Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, and Bahrain, reportedly pushed Trump privately to continue the war until there are significant changes in Iran's leadership. Significant changes in leadership. Not a ceasefire, not a deal. Regime change. The Gulf states, the countries Iran was bombing daily, were privately lobbying the American president to not stop until Tehran's government falls. That is not defensive posturing. That is an offensive political demand wrapped in diplomatic language. Here is Saudi Arabia's secret weapon, and why petroleum is the most consequential pipeline in the history of the oil market. Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz expecting Saudi Arabia to suffocate alongside it. 20 million barrels per day normally pass through that strait. Saudi Arabia diverted oil to the Red Sea port of Yanbu via the east-west crude oil pipeline, the Petroline, which runs from Abqaiq on the Gulf Coast across 1,200 kilometers of Saudi Arabia to the Red Sea, completely bypassing Hormuz. A pipeline built in the 1980s, specifically because Saudi Arabia watched the Iran-Iraq tanker war and decided it needed an exit that no Iranian weapon could reach. The pipeline was converted to full capacity on March 11, 2026, and Yanbu's oil exports surged to approximately 2.47 million barrels per day, a 330% increase compared with pre-war levels, according to maritime AI company Windward. 330% increase in 2 weeks. Saudi Aramco CEO Amin Nasser confirmed that crude flows through the east-west pipeline were being ramped up to the full capacity of 7 million barrels per day. 7 million, a number never sustained in the pipeline's entire 40-year history, tested now in wartime under Iranian drone fire. But here is what nobody is saying about Petroline's limit. While the pipeline can physically move 7 million barrels per day, the port terminals at Yanbu can only handle approximately 3 to 4 million barrels per day under current wartime conditions, meaning Saudi Arabia can pump more oil than it can load onto ships. The pipeline is a partial solution, and maximizing crude throughput through Petroline means abandoning its role carrying natural gas liquids and refined products, diesel, jet fuel, petrochemicals. Analyst Arne Lohmann Rasmussen of Global Risk Management told Middle East Eye, "This is very much a distillate crisis, a jet fuel and diesel crisis, especially in Europe. Europe's planes and trucks run on products that cannot move through Petroline, and Petroline cannot run forever without Iran finding a way to target it." Saudi Arabia reduced its oil production by 20% on March 13th, from 10 million barrels per day to 8 million, after the shutdown of 2 Saudi Aramco offshore fields, including Safaniya. Combined across the Gulf, oil production in Gulf Arab states fell by at least 10 million barrels per day, as of March 12, 2026. 10 million barrels per day, gone from global markets. The gap between what the world needs and what it is getting is measured not in percentages, but in civilizational function. Now here is the food and water crisis nobody is talking about, and why the Gulf lockdown has consequences beyond oil. The Gulf Cooperation Council imports the vast majority of its food. Around 70% of every calorie consumed in the Gulf travels through the Strait of Hormuz. 70% of food. Through the strait, Iran just closed. By mid-March, 70% of the region's food imports were disrupted, forcing retailers to airlift supplies at catastrophic cost. Airlifting groceries to feed tens of millions of people living in one of the wealthiest regions on Earth. And water. Desalination supplies 77.3% of Qatar's water demand, 67.5% of Bahrain's, and 42.2% of Kuwait's, with Qatar obtaining 99% of its potable water from desalination plants, and Bahrain more than 90%. Qatar gets nearly every drop of its drinking water from desalination, and desalination runs on energy infrastructure that Iran has been targeting with drones every single day. Iran warned publicly it will hit Gulf power plants, the same power plants that run the desalination systems that keep Doha, Manama, and Kuwait City from dying of thirst. Strip the air conditioning and the water from Gulf cities in summer heat that exceeds 50 degrees Celsius, and those cities become uninhabitable within days. That is the true nature of the Gulf lockdown. Not just oil, not just diplomacy. Survival itself. One thing is absolutely certain. Saudi Arabia expelled Iran's military attaché and 4 embassy staff with 24 hours notice on March 21st, the most dramatic diplomatic rupture since 2015. 6 Gulf states jointly invoked the UN Charter's right to self-defense in a collective statement on March 26th, reserving explicit rights to military response. Saudi Aramco's Ras Tanura refinery, 550,000 barrels per day, was struck by Iranian drones and halted operations. Iran struck Saudi refineries at Ras Tanura twice, Samref, Satorp, and Riyadh across 6 weeks. Saudi Arabia activated Petroline to its highest ever sustained flow of 7 million barrels per day, a 330% increase at Yanbu exports. Gulf Arab oil production fell by at least 10 million barrels per day by March 12th. 70% of the Gulf's food supply was disrupted. Qatar gets 99% of its drinking water from desalination plants Iran has threatened to target. Saudi Arabia, UAE, Kuwait, and Bahrain privately pushed Trump to continue operations until there are significant changes in Iran's leadership. And a Saudi geopolitical analyst told the Christian Science Monitor, everyone should pray that Saudi Arabia does not join the war. So here's what happens next. Iran thought bombing Saudi Arabia's refineries would break MBS's nerve. Instead, it shattered the Beijing agreement, expelled Iran's intelligence officials from Riyadh, built a legal case for collective military action under the UN Charter, and produced the most unified anti-Iran coalition the Arab Gulf has ever assembled. Saudi Arabia is carrying the global economy on its pipeline right now, 7 million barrels per day running through a 40-year-old tube across a desert because every other route is shut. The kingdom is talking to Iran daily through back channels while simultaneously lobbying Trump to finish the job. It is running Petroline at capacity while praying the Houthis don't target Yanbu. It is feeding a region through airlifts while desalination plants power up under drone threat. The entire Gulf is locked down, and the one country that could unlock it, or destroy it, is the same country that just had its military attaché expelled from Riyadh, with 24 hours to pack his bags. Stay tuned.